There's no shortage of information out there on the internet about the coronavirus. Sadly, a lot of this whole issue has become politicized. And is what that's doing is it's creating a lack of trust. And really, you don't know what is really going on or what the implications of COVID-19 really are. That can lead to some fear. Now, at Stewardship, we aim to serve people with wisdom and love. So we thought it'd be wise of us to try and love you well by sharing this information that we have, something that was presented to us today. Now, for some context, Stewardship is a group of many companies. We're an independent mortgage brokerage, an independent insurance agency, and an independent investment advisor. So we can help our clients and serve them by finding the products and services and companies that are best for them. On the mortgage side, we find the best lender possible. On the insurance side, we find the best insurance company possible. And on the investment side, we find the best mutual funds and investment scenarios possible. Well, one of the companies that we use on the investment side is called Eventide. And Eventide did a conference call today about the coronavirus, about COVID-19. And their big thing was to make sure that they're presenting this information without a political view, completely bipartisan, and just shared the facts from some amazing websites and amazing sources. We think this video is the best information about the coronavirus on the internet, so we wanted to share it with you. Now, some context about Eventide, and kudos to them for putting this out. Again, they're a mutual fund company, and their goal is to create a mutual fund and investments that perform well, but also make the world a better place. On the header of their website, which is eventidefunds.com, you can go there and check it out. But the header of their website, it says, "Investing that makes the world rejoice." How cool is that? So there's some context to who we are, who Eventide is, so you know what you're getting into with this video. Again, we think it's the best information about the coronavirus on the internet. And before you freak out about how long the video is, I'm gonna share with you a quick tip and a hack. If you click the gear icon in the bottom right of the YouTube video, you can typically go into the settings and speed the video up to even 2 times speed. And that will make you get through this video in half the amount of time. Again, this video is our attempt to wisely provide some real information to love you well, and we hope that you enjoy. Stick around to the end as I'm going to share our thoughts and our feedback, not only on this video, but on this entire situation as a whole.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our call. My name is Finney Curavilla, and I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Eventide Funds, and I'm going to be sharing with you today our assessment of the rapidly evolving coronavirus situation, as well as implications for market and investing. Just as a reminder, this is a statement that's a presentation that's going to have forward-looking statements, and there's no guarantee that these views will necessarily come to pass. There's going to be 2 parts to this presentation. The first part is going to cover coronavirus and the unfolding of this now labeled pandemic, and that's going to be approved and available for a general retail audience. The second part of this presentation will be just on the macro environment from an economic and investing perspective, which is intended for financial professionals only. And if you would like to download slides, you can get that from this URL here, go.eventidefunds.com/COVID-19. There's also going to be a replay available at this same URL. And then if you want to ask any questions, we're going to do Q&A at the end. Feel free to write in to info@eventidefunds.com. Once again, if you have any questions, just write them in to info@eventidefunds.com, and we'll do our best to address those questions. So let's start. We have seen worrisome coronavirus before, and a lot of you on the call will remember these 2 previous episodes that drew a lot of international attention. The first is called MERS, coronavirus. So that COV stands for coronavirus, and MERS stands for the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, sometimes known as camel virus. This is a virus that, as the name suggests, was sourced from the Middle East and was associated with camel and camel meat. And it has a very high case fatality rate of 34.4%. We're going to talk about case fatality rate quite a bit in this presentation here. So it's very simple. It's basically how likely is a patient to die if they contract the virus. So if you got this MERS coronavirus, you were 34% likely to die. So very high case fatality rate. That was just a few years ago. But then going way back to 2003, there was another coronavirus called SARS, which stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, so SARS, coronavirus. And that virus also began in China, and it moved from civets to humans in 2003, and it also had a very high case fatality rate. It was about 15%, so not as high as MERS coronavirus, but still remarkably high. In case you're wondering what a civet is, it's this creature here. It's a cute little cat. This is considered a delicacy in China. And once the authorities discovered that indeed this was the reservoir for the virus, they ordered a mass killing of these animals, and so they killed approximately 10,000 of these civets, many of which were actually drowned. So we've seen this twice before, although not quite as earth-shaking as the current instantiation of coronavirus, which we're going to be moving towards now. So let's first get our names straight. So there's the name of the virus, which the current virus that's going around is actually called SARS coronavirus 2. So the original SARS was the one I mentioned from 2003 from civets, but this one is also a cousin of that, so it's called also Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus -2. And the disease name is coronavirus disease 2019 because the disease was first identified in late 2019. And so as you can see here from my screen here, the acronym here is just COVID, COVID-19. So that's the name of the virus, and that's the name of the disease, and it's helpful to know both of these as we engage in the literature and as we hear different reports. Why is it called coronavirus? Well, if you look at it microscopically under very high resolution, what you would see are pictures like this. And as you can see here, there's this halo with almost these little spikes that surrounds the viral particles here. And for that reason, someone thought it looked like a crown. And corona is a word that means crown, and so hence the name crown virus or coronavirus. So that's the name. How are we doing in terms of cases? I updated all these slides late last night, and so I wanted to have as current information as we could. So this is as of last night at about 10 o'clock. We had globally around 126,000 cases with about 4,000 deaths. In the United States, as of yesterday, we have 1,322 cases and 38 deaths. Now, a lot of people, when they see those numbers, they think, for good reason, hey, that's a very small number, 38 deaths, 1,300 cases, and it feels like the whole nation is gripped with this. Why such a fuss? Why all the hullabaloo and just such dramatic action with shutting down universities? I'm sure many of you saw the NBA has decided to cancel all of its games. Many conferences have been closed down. A tremendous amount of travel has been restricted. So why this kind of response given such a small number of deaths and cases? That's a big question, particularly when we have other viruses like regular influenza that kills tens of thousands of people every year in the United States and approximately 300,000 globally. Are we making too much of a fuss about coronavirus? Is this hysteria or is this rational? And we're going to come to that in a little bit. Before we get to that specific question about are we making too much of a fuss here, we're going to look at the fatality rate. So this is important for us to understand for reasons we're going to see. This is just taking the data on who's contracted the virus and then what % of those patients die, but it's stratifying that by age groups. You can see 9 and younger, 10 to 19, 20 to 29, et cetera, all the way up to 80 and older. And what you can see is a pretty clear, nearly monotonic relationship of as you grow in age, your fatality rate is much, much greater. So you can see in the 80 and older population, it's about a 15% fatality rate. The blended average here is a number that is slowly but surely being determined. The initial estimates were around 3% for all comers of all ages. Once we factor in the fact that there's going to be people who are asymptomatic or who don't go to a hospital, the data are pointing to closer to 1%. Some would say 1.6%, but here in the United States, Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Association for Infections or Allergy and Infectious Disease, he's quoting the number 1% there. But we need to just remember here that 1% is an overall average. It's much less than 1 if you're a young person, but much greater than 1 if you're an older person, particularly if you have comorbidities like diabetes, pulmonary conditions, et cetera. This is an incredibly important graph, and I would make the case that this chart here is the one that the markets are staring at. I know when I wake up in the mornings, this is one of the things that I'm doing every day when I wake up, and I'm checking from 3 different websites to get an accurate estimate of how many new coronavirus cases are being announced in the U.S. each day. So you can see there was very little for a while, and then just in the last couple of weeks, it's grown very rapidly. And what we really need to know is this going to continue exponentially? Is it going to decay? How do we know? We clearly don't have enough data yet. We've only just been a few days into this period of dramatic increase. And so what we're going to talk about is how we can know and figure out, particularly for those of us who are making investing decisions around this trajectory. So as of yet, we don't have enough data, but I think we'll have that data shortly, as we'll talk about soon. All right, one of the things that has gotten people more frightened is comparing basically how contagious this new coronavirus is compared to its older cousin, SARS. And as you can see here, this is a very interesting and important graph that shows here day 0 is the first day that the WHO gets a report of the outbreak. And you can see when we look at the gray line here how long and how slow of an incline up it was for regular SARS to move up. But then you can see with coronavirus 2 or COVID-19, you can see how quickly that has escalated. And so this is clearly a more contagious disease than SARS. In addition, the world, and particularly China, where this originated from, is much more mobile than it was. They estimate about 4 times more mobility than back in 2003 as the country's gotten more prosperous. And so you have a more virulent virus as well as a more mobile population combining to a more rapid spread. So this is one of the reasons why there's been quite a bit of fear, and certainly much more fear than existed around SARS back in 2003. How bad could it get? So as I mentioned, a lot of people are saying, hey, this is the flu. This is, when we compare it to the flu, this is way less significant than the flu. When you look at tens of thousands of deaths from the flu and millions of infections in the United States, why in the world are we making such a fuss? Well, here's the reason why people are making a fuss, and it's very simple, very easy to understand. Before I show you the data, though, I want to just say that this issue has been highly politicized. People on the right and various news outlets from the right have generally been minimizing it, saying it's under control, we've got it, although that's been changing a little bit in the last couple of days. People from more left-leaning stations have been saying, oh, it's really terrible, and look how poorly the president is doing. And so you can see how this issue could be used by either side for their own purposes here. As all of you know, I have very little desire to opine about politics. I think about this much more as an investor and as a human being. And so what we really want to try to do is be mathematically disciplined and nonpartisan. And so the calculation is extremely simple. If we assume that 50% of Americans in a worst case scenario could contract COVID-19, and there's an epidemiologist named Mark Lipsitch, who's at Harvard, who has said this is well within the realm of possibility. So let's assume that. And then a case fatality rate of 1%, that's where, generally speaking, the literature is converging towards, maybe a little bit higher than that, but for the sake of being realistic about, hey, treatments are going to get better as we learn more about the disease, let's say about a case fatality rate of 1%. So the population of the United States is 330 million. So if we multiply that by 50% of people who get the disease in this scenario, and then multiply that by a case fatality rate of 1%, that would imply 1.7 million people dying. So this is why people are worried, and epidemiologists and public health officials are worried about it, not because of what's happened in the past, because it is a small number, 38 people. On the grand scale of things, obviously it's a terrible tragedy for those individuals, but on the grand scale of things, many more people die in car accidents and very obscure diseases and illnesses that we wouldn't really think about much, and it certainly wouldn't gain the kind of headline attention that it has. But when we think about 1.7 million Americans potentially dying, this becomes serious. But, and here's the key, this is near worst case, and this is sobering. I'm going to try to show you in this call why this is preventable, and why, if we work together, we keep cool heads, we're rational, and we're willing to cooperate and follow best practices here, we don't need to get anywhere near this level of fatality and tragedy. To understand why, we need to go back to the Chinese situation. So in China, they obviously were where this disease began, so they have a lot more history. The disease began in November, December there, and so now there's 4 months or so of history. And they had a large number of people contract the disease, but since then, a large number of people get better. And they haven't had anything like the millions and millions of deaths that would be possible, particularly in a country that's much larger than ours. So do we believe that data? And this is very important because a lot of people just out of hand dismiss Chinese data as being unreliable, untrustworthy. Clearly they have a government that is concerned with self-preservation, and who knows, right? So I understand why people are suspicious about Chinese data. So what happened was this individual here, who's shown on the right, his name is Bruce Aylward. He's the assistant general director of the World Health Organization. He's a physician as well as has an MPH degree. He trained at Johns Hopkins. He led a team of 13 foreign scientists into China, and China gave them the green light to do their own studies, to take their own samples, to go around and basically do their own independent field visits to assess the situation and to write a report. And this is not from the report itself. I'll show you the report momentarily, but what Dr. Aylward said was the big question is, are they, meaning the Chinese, hiding things? And he says, no, they are not. We looked at many different things to try to corroborate that cases are dropping. When I went to fever clinics and talked to people working there, they'd say, we used to have a line out the door, and now we see a case once per hour. According to the national data, fever clinics went from seeing 46,000 people per day at one point, and it's now down to 1,000. So there's been a huge drop in numbers into the feeder system. Second thing, when talking to physicians in hospitals, I heard again and again that we have open beds. We can get people isolated even more rapidly. I heard that in Wuhan and other provinces. The third thing, I talked to people running clinical trials of drugs, and they're having a problem recruiting patients. All these things helped corroborate China's data. In addition to that, publicly traded companies are now saying that factories are going back online, work is resuming again. So we have multiple data points, and what Bruce Aylward and the WHO and this team of scientists said was, they said, you know what, the Chinese data here is basically reliable, that they had a lot of cases and now it's dying. And that is super encouraging, because that means that this disease, if aggressively handled, can be contained without mass casualties. This is the report, the formal report. If you are interested in downloading that report, it's free. The link is right there on the bottom of the screen. You can download the slides and click on it for yourself and read what these scientists wrote. I've gone through it a couple times. It's a very interesting report. One of the things they did was they looked at the specific biology of the virus, and they did their best to ascertain the origin. They talked about spread. Very interesting report. It's about 40 pages long. And relating to that, one of the the interesting data points that came out of all this was basically a lot of soul searching here, as this article from the Wall Street Journal last week highlights, that this virus, this coronavirus, sparks soul searching over China's wild animal trade. And this is discussed briefly in the report that I mentioned on the previous page, that the reason that this virus has come into humans is from almost certainly practices of killing and consumption of very unusual forms of animals and meat. So these are just some photographs from so-called wet markets in China, and these markets are discussed in the paper and many websites that some of you may have seen. There's a particular market in Wuhan that was the source, likely, it's still shadowy, but likely the source of the virus. In that report that I mentioned, they did genome sequencing on many samples, and they concluded that the virus was most likely from a bat as the reservoir. Now, that might not have been the direct means of transmission. It might have gone from a bat to another animal. We don't exactly know, but the animal origin appears to be bat. They do have bats at this particular market in China. It is a massive market. It's a massive market that spans about 9 football fields. It has 1,000 stalls, kind of open-air stalls, where business people sell, and I put some of the animals down here on the bottom, foxes, ostriches, wolf puppies, bamboo rats, civets, peacocks, snakes, turtles, frogs, bats, porcupines, camels. You can see the carcasses of these animals over here. You can see a man slicing a snake over here. This is from a photograph from a restaurant in Wuhan where they serve bat soup. So this is actually the soup that you can see the bat in. So clearly unusual for American standards, and almost certainly in some way that we don't exactly know all the details, but came over from these creatures into humans. At this point now, the virus has moved. Wuhan is, and Hubei in general, is an area with a lot of traffic going in and out, and so the virus moved quickly out of China into many other countries, primarily now hotspots of Iran, Italy, South Korea. And so you can see, as of yesterday, 2/3 of the cases were that to date are Chinese, about 1/3 from other countries. But here is the snapshot, and this is a very important slide, so please read this carefully with me. This is what the WHO has concluded based on that formal report and that formal joint venture that they did when they went into China. So here's what, this is written by Bruce Aylward. He says, "I think the key learning from China is speed. It's all about the speed. The faster you can find the cases, isolate the cases, and track their close contacts, the more successful you're going to be. People keep saying the cases are the tip of the iceberg, but we couldn't find that. We found there's a lot of people who are cases, a lot of close contacts, but not a lot of asymptomatic circulation of this virus in the bigger population. And that's different from flu. China got patients in treatment early and have highly sophisticated healthcare treatment procedures. They are really good at keeping people alive with this disease. They have a survival rate with a mortality rate of just under 1% outside of Hubei province for this disease. I would not extrapolate to the rest of the world. They're basically saying China is more advanced in their healthcare with respect to this virus. What you've seen in Italy and Iran is that a lot of people are dying. Panic and hysteria are not appropriate. This is a disease that is in the cases and in their close contacts. It is not a hidden enemy lurking behind bushes. Get organized, get educated, and get working." Okay, very, very important insight here from, again, one of the key people leading this effort at the WHO, basically saying this isn't something where we need to feel like it's everywhere. Every single day when I go through my reading on coronavirus, I try to read as much as I can about, hey, was this new case transmissible? Was it something where we can find a link that it came from this person who was in Italy or someone from, and almost always you can link a set of chains together of how this individual got the virus. It's not coming out of nowhere. And so that's really the theme of what Bruce Aylward is saying. Because it's something that follows predictable lines, it's something that with the right intervention can be contained. Okay, this is very, very important. Okay, next key idea here. How long from infection to symptoms? This is a paper that just came out 2 days ago, so it's hot off the press. I'm showing you here a copy of the title of the paper on the left. And what they're trying to understand is how long from when you contract the disease, when the virus enters you and you're infected, to when you show symptoms. That's a very important number for hopefully obvious reasons, but I'll unpack that in a moment. So the answer is the median incubation period is 5 days. So from when you get infected to when you show symptoms, the median is going to be 5 days. So the median covers obviously 50%, so 50% are going to be less than 5 days, 50% more than 5. What if you want to get 99% of all the cases? Well, you got to wait 14 days. So if you wait 14 days, you're going to get 99% of all the people who have the virus to have declared themselves, and they're going to show symptoms. Okay, this is incredibly important because if people can practice social distancing, which a lot of you know that term, it's working at home, avoiding crowded areas, practicing as much as you can, good habits of hygiene, and like I said, particularly avoiding crowds and areas where you might have contact with people who are carriers. Well, if you can do that, then hey, this is amazing. Within 14 days, all of the symptomatic people, or 99% of the symptomatic people, will declare themselves without spreading the disease further. And so if we're willing to pay, hey, it's inconvenient, but a 2-week cost, we could decimate this virus. Because we wait those 2 weeks. If you've got the virus and you show symptoms, you go in, you check yourself into the healthcare system, you get treated. We know about you. Everybody else who's working at home and staying contained, which I realize is not possible for everyone, but they're having to be inconvenient. But then we know then who's got it and who doesn't because of this period. And the virus isn't jumping from person to person to conference in this. Aggressive action now will pay great, tremendous dividends later. This is one of the big lessons here. So this incubation period, again, remember that. 5 days is the median, 14 days you get 99% of people. So if we're willing to do this 2-week social distancing, we can decimate this virus. Here's another way of showing this. This is an important concept. This is the concept of curve flattening. Okay, so let's walk through this. On the x-axis here is time since first case. On the y-axis is number of cases. So if you don't do anything, you're going to get a bell-shaped curve, which you normally get without protective measures. The problem is our healthcare system capacity is here, the dotted line. And most hospitals are running near full pretty much all the time. Having worked in a hospital, I can tell you that beds are always precious and a scarce resource. And so the system doesn't have a lot of slack in it. So if you get a bunch of people who enter into the system in a bolus, you're going to just overwhelm the system. It's going to decrease quality for people who have their appendix burst or who need some kind of surgery for some other reason. And of course, the people who have coronavirus are going to be poorly treated because there's just not the ventilators, there's not the staffing that's required. So this is bad. If we can put in the social distancing measures and then basically flatten out and push to the right, even if it's the same number of people, now of course it's going to be less if you do good social distancing, this in and of itself is a major win for the system as a whole. I want to stress that this is something where if we are aggressive with social distancing, we can really kick this virus to smithereens. And that's what I want to see here. And I'm going to urge all of you, insofar as you have control over your location and as your managers and organizers of conferences, that you promote that. The World Bank estimates that if this becomes a severe pandemic, then that would have a tremendous effect on global GDP of about almost 5%. And you can see the 08-09 financial crisis was 4.3%. So we need to be serious about this, and we need to not let it be this. I think keeping it in this mild pandemic zone is what we all want to do, and we can do that if we simply follow these best practices. So what can we do? Hey, you've heard this from everywhere, I assume, but I'll say it again here. Frequently wash your hands with soap. This is more effective than hand sanitizer. I know there's people out there, because there's a shortage on hand sanitizers, they're trying to make home brews out of vodka and who knows what. Like, hey, you don't need to go to all that trouble. Just buy a bar of soap, wash your hands a lot. That's going to be the single best thing you can do for maintaining good hygiene. Keep your hands away from your face. Most of us are constantly touching our face, our eyes, our nose, our mouth. Bad habits that we need to break. Sneeze correctly. When you sneeze, you should sneeze into the crook of your arm or into tissue that you throw away, do it right. Don't sneeze into your hand, and certainly don't sneeze into open air, which we don't know exactly, but it is likely that the virus can live on surfaces for several hours, and poor sneezing and coughing practices is going to propagate the virus. More elbow bumping and less handshaking. This is going to be something that is a little socially interesting. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and the conference organizer said, nobody shake hands here, just elbow bump. And it was kind of fun, and everyone got the hang of it, and everyone got out of the habit of handshaking. I think for a temporary measure, that's wise. I really think that this practice here, this 1 to 2 and ideally 2 week social distancing, is a smart idea. It's inconvenient, but if you can work at home, if you can avoid crowds and unnecessary travel, do so. It's a great way to put into practice love your neighbor as yourself, because you're shielding the elderly in particular from virus. Don't say it's just the elderly and sick who get this. They are valuable members of our society. We want to take care of them. They're someone else's mother, grandmother, father, grandfather. These are important members of our community, and just because you're a healthy 40-year-old, we should not be cavalier about this, because really we're serving them insofar as we adopt good practices. And don't show anger, racism, or xenophobia towards Asians and Chinese here in the U.S. It's not their fault. This is happening. Now is the time for compassion, education, and working together. And especially for those of us who are religious, to be praying for the well-being of our communities. You know, there's a lot of anxiety out there. A lot of people are doing some soul searching. This is a great time to be praying, to talking to people, and this combination of people potentially losing their jobs in a variety of industries, with the fear of the illnesses, with just all of the morbidity and scary headlines that we're seeing. It's a scary time. It's a good reminder for all of us that you know, in the Bible it talks about how there's going to be wars and rumors of wars and pestilence and famine, but those who put their trust in God should not be shaken. This is something where we should have a lot of confidence in God as the only true rock and the only true fortress in the midst of a world full of tumult. I'm going to go a little bit further. That's kind of where most of the standard advice stops. I'm going to go a little bit further here and issue a challenge that hopefully is received. I recognize not everyone will want to do this, and it's something that some might believe to be extreme, although I don't think it is. So to introduce that, what do the following diseases have in common? HIV, mad cow, influenza, MERS, so-called camel flu, SARS, bird flu, coronavirus, maybe we'll call that bat flu, and salmonella. So what do all those diseases have in common? Well, you may know, or you may not know, that these diseases all came from human-animal interactions. These are called zoonoses. 3 out of 4, according to the CDC, new or emerging infectious diseases come from animals. HIV came from bush meat, some kind of chimpanzee meat. Mad cows, obviously from cows. Influenza comes from pigs and chickens. MERS, camel, I mentioned that. SARS, bats. Coronavirus, exotic animals, and salmonella, chicken. So these are very serious conditions. Imagine a world without HIV. Imagine a world without influenza that kills 300,000 people a year. Imagine how different our world would be without coronavirus right now. So these are very serious. And I'm going to say this: the root cause is these, particularly for influenza, but it's these industrial livestock complex where they stuff a bunch of animals in very small spaces, treat them very poorly, very cruelly. This industry, which is fueled by the desire for cheap meat, has killed millions of people. And as I mentioned, influenza alone kills 300,000 per year. The vast majority of fast food meat, restaurant meat, is this kind of factory farmed industrial livestock complex. If you can not patronize that, that puts into practice love your neighbor as yourself, which is a big tagline we use at Eventide here, obviously from the Bible, particularly the elderly and the weak. And if you're going to buy meat, hey, buy truly free range, which it's expensive. It's about $10 a pound from animals that are not housed in cages. Like I said before, restaurant meat and certainly not fast food meat is rarely from these compassionately raised animals. When I was in medical school, I was sitting in a microbiology class many years ago, and this was not the topic, but the professor of the course put up this table where, similar to the one I showed on the previous slide, where he showed all the different diseases that are afflicting humanity. And the light bulb went off for me when I read this verse here on my own study, which is Proverbs chapter 12, verse 10. The righteous person cares for the life of his animal, but the mercy of the wicked is cruel. And I put two and two together, and I said, you know what? If this is what righteousness is, to be compassionate, to care for the life of an animal, but it's cruel, it's wicked, rather, to be cruel to animals, then if we go against God's ways of what he teaches in the Bible, well, eventually that's going to come back to our own harm. And what we're seeing with all these diseases is just more and more examples of how if we go against God's ways, we're going to eventually hurt ourselves and hurt others with those practices. A few inspirational quotes from people from diverse perspectives. Oh, actually, before that, this is where influenza comes from, and these places where animals are kept in stalls so small that the animal can't even turn around, and they're kept in very close confinement, very unnatural compared to how they're supposed to live. But here's some quotes here. This is Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, "You have just dined, and however scrupulously the slaughterhouse is concealed in the graceful distance of miles, there is complicity." Immanuel Kant says, "We can judge the heart of a man by his treatment of animals." Henry Spira, who's an activist in the field, says, "I began to wonder why we cuddle some animals and put a fork in others." This is Francis of Assisi, pretty well-known figure in Christian circles, who says, "If you have men who will exclude any of God's creatures from the shelter of compassion and pity, you will have men who will deal likewise with their fellow man." Mahatma Gandhi, a key person in the founding of India, says, "Violence begins with a fork." Albert Einstein, a brilliant man who wrote this almost 100 years ago, "Nothing will benefit human health and increases chances for survival for life on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet." Leo Tolstoy, a very committed Christian who wrote War and Peace, he said, "A man can live and be healthy without killing animals for food. Therefore, if he eats meat, he participates in taking animal life merely for the sake of his appetite, and to act so is immoral." I'm not trying to be condemning or anything here with these quotes, but just to show you what some leading Christian thinkers and other thinkers have offered on this subject as we're facing constant death and morbidity as a result of our food choices. A Roman Catholic, John Henry Newman, says there is something so very dreadful, so satanic in tormenting those who have never harmed us and who cannot defend themselves, who are utterly in our power, who have weapons neither of offense nor defense, that none but very hardened persons can endure the thought of it. And then finally, Fyodor Dostoevsky, who wrote Crime and Punishment and other very celebrated novels, wrote, "Love animals. God has given them the rudiments of thought and joy untroubled. Do not trouble their joy. Don't harass them. Don't deprive them of their happiness. Don't work against God's intent. Man, do not pride yourself on superiority to animals. They are without sin. And you, with your greatness, defile the earth by your appearance on it and leave the traces of your foulness after you. Alas, it is true of almost every one of us." Again, he's another Christian thinker here who challenges us to think about this. Keep in mind, there's nothing in the Bible that was anything like these factory farms or industrial complexes. I'm not opposed, nor do I think it's sinful to consume meat that's compassionately raised, but I think the way that we've gone is just completely off the rails. And as I said, this is leading to millions and millions of people dying, and now hundreds of billions of dollars lost in economies globally as a result of these eating practices. All right, so conclusions for this first part. The second part is much shorter, but COVID-19 has serious implications in worst-case scenarios. We can't trifle with this. A lot of the analogies people are using about the flu are just not good analogies. They don't really understand some key variables in this. Good news, based on the Chinese experience, this disease can be contained. So let's follow public health recommendations. Let's be aggressive with detecting, treating, quarantining. We can act decisively here. Putting good hygiene. I mentioned hand washing, sneezing correctly, not touching your face, social distancing for 1 to 2 weeks. If we operate together concertedly, we could have a dramatic effect on the trajectory of this virus. Get at the root cause of coronavirus, influenza, and other diseases by stopping your patronage of the industrial livestock factories. This is an industry that's killed millions. Hey, the market's already lost 20% from this. It's the most rapid decline that we've had in history. in terms of market cap. Rapid, meaningful action could restore these losses if the market gets confidence that this isn't going to go on and on. But disorganization and indecision likely means further downside. So with that, I'm going to close this first part of the presentation, which, as I said at the beginning, is intended for a general audience.
All right, so thanks again to Eventide for putting this together. They actually put this out for people that are in the professional services world, and we're grateful for them to kind of taking a portion of that video out and allowing it to go out into the public. Check out Eventide at eventidefunds.com. We think they're a great company. We use them to help our clients with biblically responsible investing, making sure that their investments align with their values. So here's our takeaways, not only about this presentation, but also the takeaways that we have about this entire situation. Our first takeaway is that this is a real virus. It's making real people sick. And sometimes real people are dying. Would you join us in praying for the protection of life that is precious? So that's takeaway one. This is a real thing. Now, takeaway two is there's good news. The good news is our world and our country has seen things similar to this many times before. And our country has been able to overcome this. And what's more is that the country of origin where this particular virus started is already starting to recover, and maybe by the time you watch this video has already fully recovered. So as a result, with wisdom, we will be fine. And that is reassuring. And we hope that you guys can find that reassuring too. So let's move forward about this coronavirus with wisdom and love. Again, thanks to Eventide for putting this information out there. We appreciate you guys, and we hope that you appreciated this video. Again, we did this because we love you. So if there's people that you love that you think would find this video helpful or encouraging, share it with them. Share this video, share this information with other people, because we think that our society, our world right now needs real information filled with wisdom and love, not a bunch of stuff that is hard for us to trust. Again, we're thankful for you guys. We love you. Let's move forward in wisdom and love as we kind of navigate this whole coronavirus thing.